the recording as well, that we can take advantage of that as well. So just to quickly summarize the format, some of you might be familiar with it, but we will now turn to Katie for about 4 minutes to present her pitch. We will then have 15 minutes of a discussion with Marina, Chrissy, Katya, and Marlee. And then, of course, we will receive feedback from the funders after the Q&A conversation, and then turn to you for audience for your feedback as well. So the chat, though, is open for you to share your thoughts at any point. So Katie, the floor is yours. I will keep tabs of 4 minutes. You will get a warning from me, and just to keep us to schedule. So Katie, over to you.
Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen. I'm not entirely sure if you can see what I can see. Do you see a PowerPoint with some faces on it? Okay, good. Well, I think, thank you for asking me to do this, Jan, but it's fairly terrifying. So I'm grateful-ish. But thank you really for the opportunity. It's really exciting. So, oh, I've got some very peculiar subtitles going on the bottom. Anyway, Now Teach, as I mentioned earlier, I set us up with the journalist Lucy Calloway about over 5 years ago now. And the idea was that we believed there was a wasted pool of people whose talent wasn't being used, which could be used in schools, and in schools, particularly serving disadvantaged communities, which could really benefit from the skills, networks, experiences of these people. We have come a long way since then. We've made all sorts of mistakes, of course, but one of the things that I think, truthfully, we were right in that hunch. We've now recruited 500 people have joined the system, and there'll be another 200 starting in September. And they are amazing people from a range of backgrounds, you know, all across all kinds of different industries, from the city and finance to people who run their own companies, to people who've been actors or film producers or journalists. Massive range of skills that you're bringing into communities that you hope could really benefit from them. Well, and the question then of network comes to, because we've set up, we can do this, she says confidently, but we can, and the government believes in that too. And so we are being paid on a contract, and very sort of, to be blunt about our sort of finances, we're paid on a contract which is all linked to how many people we can recruit and can we support them through those first couple of years until they're qualified as teachers, which is fine and all well and good. But the big vision, the whole point of doing this really was not that we were going to solve the recruitment crisis, though I hope we help it, and not that we were just going to bring talented people in for the benefit of their, you know, immediately and in their school to be good classroom teachers, though we are. The whole hope was that if you could put these people together, if you could have a whole bunch of, you know, data scientists figuring out how data can be better used in schools, if you could have a bunch of people who were really seriously good at people management and people strategy, thinking about how schools could do it better, if you could have people who've made films, bringing filmmaking into the English curriculum, or whatever it might be, that these people then add up to the sum of their parts, to more than the sum of their parts, I should say, and they become more than 500 scattered teachers in a big system. They become genuinely a movement and a community. And in order to make them make the impact, they have to be retained in teaching, of course, and we have to help them work together to make sure they bring their unique skills into the classroom and into those schools. So, and that doesn't happen right at the beginning. At the beginning, they're just becoming teachers. It's going to be a long-term thing, but we're getting there, and it feels incredibly exciting 5 years on to begin to see those first early year teachers doing some of the astonishing things they're doing, whether it's career support for teachers and helping younger teachers figure out their own leadership skills, whether it is whether it's doing some of the stuff I was talking about with data and really fundamentally altering the efficiency of data collection across big maps, multi-academy chains, tons of stuff they're just beginning to do. And I think there's so much more they could do if we can help them, that network that they belong to, be strong and be powerful. we have been working with InHive, in fact, to help us get to the stage where we feel that we've got some of the kind of the bare bones of it right, if you like. We've done a good assessment of where we are. We've created a steerco. I've just put the excerpt there of the letter they write. They've now got a magazine, and this is a sort of introduction from the steerco. We've brought them together to co-write a vision. We have begun to understand how for this network to operate properly, it must be truly led by now teachers, though facilitated by us. And so the vision you see there, I'm obviously not going to read it all out, but this is the vision that they have written and that we want to help them achieve together. So what have we done? I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but with the support of InHive, you know, our structure and leadership feels like it's beginning to get the right stage. We are mapping out the way we do our communication and engagement with the network, their various activities, and of course, critically, the monitoring and evaluation. But it's clearly, to do this well, it's a significant investment of time. And coming back to the point at the minute that I mentioned before about the Department for Education, they fund us to do a nice tick box achievable thing. 500 teachers, tick, X% qualified, 90% qualified, tick, this is good. This is short term and it's clear. And I think that's the kind of thing that government deals well with, perhaps is correct that they should deal well with. What is much harder is the longer term, perhaps slightly nebulous, but ultimately more powerful ideas that are bound up in the idea of network, because some of this we don't exactly know what the impact will be, because there have never been groups of teachers like this together in schools, and that's what's exciting, but it also makes it hard to go and say, "I've got a contract for doing this." So the next steps, we feel quite clear about what we need to do. You know, we've got to raise the profile of the network, the status of it, if you like, shout about what its members are doing, enable their engagement with one another. And we must continue, you know, what we're doing with InHive to make sure we're getting the strategy right, to develop the resources, invest in communicating with them, and critically make sure we as an organization are resourced correctly to achieve all of this. I think that Jan is waving his hand at me to say, be quiet. And so I will indeed be quiet. And
not to be quiet at all, Katie. No, thank you so much for that. And there is now the opportunity for our funders to ask you further questions. So you will now have the opportunity to also elaborate on some of the points. So I guess now the floor is open to Marlee, Chrissy, and Marina and Katya. So please, we have about 15 minutes, and again, I'll give you a warning. So the floor is yours.
I'm happy to jump in. Thank you for sharing that, Katie. It's a really exciting network and a really exciting opportunity. My question for you is around the actions that the network members are taking as participants in this network. And so certainly at the high level, they are taking actions such as making a career transition, they're teaching, they're hopefully staying engaged with teaching. But when it comes to the participation in the network itself, could you share a little bit more about the types of activities that these members are doing both now and what you envision as you build out this network engagement capability for teachers that are a little bit further along that journey?
Of course, yes. So in the early stages, the events, truthfully, and the almost everything we put in place feels mostly about supporting them, whether that's through network events with people who kind of gone before, if you like, can be done, or you know, we have quite a lot of interaction with them in the first 2 years, program managers to support them through what they're doing. In terms of then the things that are more specifically networked, there's a mixture of stuff. So some of it feels more affinity groups, if you like. So for example, a parenting group. It's quite unusual to be a trainee teacher with teenage children, say. So how do you navigate that? They are the only group of people doing that. Or an affinity group around gender and sexuality, for example. And what we hope there will be more of, and are coming. Then there are also fairly sort of, as it were, straightforward support ones: subject, location, places they go because they recognize their peers, people who've had the same set of experiences and are day to day doing something very similar, teaching maths, want some advice, want to moan, whatever it might be. Where we hope it shifts to is the more so we have a group, for example, the data scientist one I keep bringing up because they're a strong group. Like they have made, there's only a few of them, but they've made a real tangible difference in terms of saving time for teachers within the MAP. MAP is a multi-academy, so like a chain of schools that they work in, and it centrally has changed the way it does its data. And what I hope is that we will have more and more of those kinds of groups where they are sharing more of, if you like, their past than the immediate day-to-day of what they're doing, and it's the past linking together that could be valuable to the current now of their teaching. I don't know if I explained that well.
Just a follow-up question on that, Katie. First of all, congrats. I think it's a great network. I guess my question is who, because from what I heard is you're trying to influence a little bit more the curriculum or the broader structure, no, and not just in one school place someone, as you said. Yeah. Who would be the other stakeholders that you would need on the table in order to be able to influence what you want to influence?
That's another great question. I think one of the key stakeholders must be the schools themselves. Funnily enough, I feel at the minute that's almost more important than kind of government department policy level people. It's seeing the action in focus, but it is also helping schools to understand what is possible, which is where I think this whole kind of amplification process is so important. That, you know, if I could tell every head teacher what their group of data scientists have done, or if I could tell every teacher how the two people who used to work in AI have developed to like after school AI club, and they're different schools, but they've kind of been sharing materials, and now those schools have like way oversubscribed AI clubs. What wasn't mine, but anyway, then I feel like head teachers would go to now teachers and say, so you used to make films for the BBC, how about, you know, X, Y, and Z. Whereas at the minute they're a little inclined to either just not really look at the CVs at all, or to sort of perhaps view them with a little anxiety or suspicion, or just not knowing, you know, that can be a complaint from our teachers, that they feel undervalued by the system that they've gone into, which makes sense because that system doesn't know how to value them, doesn't know what's possible. But then yes, other partners. So there's a group of scientists worried that the curriculum we have doesn't prepare young people for science today. It feels the curriculum is outdated. So that would mean much more working with the subject associations, for example.
Hi, Katie, thank you. That was a really brilliant pitch. I've got a question kind of around, I know obviously you're pitching to a group of funders at the moment, but obviously what you were saying about the Department of Education and this being like a particular type of funding tied to specific results, essentially. And obviously, you know, philanthropy and foundations and other funders have the ability to take a bit more of a risk, right? To say like, we're kind of investing in this and seeing kind of what happens. But some of the questions we might ask around is kind of how does our funding as a philanthropic entity, how will it kind of contribute to long-term sustainability, and how might our funds leverage other funds going forward, and kind of really looking at, you know, how would we kind of catalyze change, I suppose, and you won't kind of rely on our funding for the real long term.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and something that I think one of the journey, if you like, that I've been on within Hive is to have gone from, okay, so we have to do the network and we've got to like make it work like a kind of conductor of an orchestra and sort of have the different bits of it operating and be in charge of a grand plan, saying no, it's in a way more frightening than that. You've got to totally let go and the orchestra will create itself in maybe lots of different, the analogy is going to break down now, but anyway, there will be a little quartet over here and a big old lot of people here and that lot of dancing, they're not even singing, but you know, and that what we need to do is notice those groups, observe them, support them, buy them the odd violin or whatever it is they need, but basically they need to be the ones sustaining this. So it feels to me like, and I don't know how long it takes, but I hope not more than maybe 5 years or so to properly embed that, then it can genuinely become a community where they are essentially leading, and it is as close to possible as being a proper grassroots organization, albeit we sowed the grass, but they are now, the lawn is there and it's in charge. And I think, you know, there's small actions we're doing. We have a big event coming up in a couple of weeks' time, which is an in conversation with the Children's Commissioner. Previously, I would have been the person to do the in conversation just as a kind of default. Now we'll have a now teacher doing it. And then what we're hoping is that, you know, they will invite people they want to come to the events. And it's sort of slowly, I've been learning a lot from InHive, maybe bullying people into doing things almost like they suggested it. I mean, they didn't quite, but now it begins to look like the members suggested it, and in time they will. So I think that is our model for it, to enable it to become grassroots kind of bottom up thing.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I think that's a really great point, and I think I'd need to work on almost demonstrating that visually, or kind of making that quite concrete.
Yeah, because I think what you'll essentially be kind of asking for is like trust-based core funding, which is very difficult to get out of funders. So I guess yeah, thinking through, you know, you might not be able to have a set budget, but looking at how you can convince for kind of unrestricted, open-ended in that way.
Yeah, that makes really good sense. Thank you.
Any other questions from the funders? We still have about 8 minutes. You're welcome to see any further clarifications from Katie if there's anything else you would like to ask about.
I could just add on that, you know, generally this was a pitch, but I think it's always good to see timescales, ballpark budget figures at this early stage, especially related to what the funder offers in terms of different categories of funding or different programs of funding. So obviously you couldn't tailor it because you're speaking to a group today, but I think that always comes across really well to have kind of, this fits really well within your, I don't know, this particular sub-grant program, and you know it's within this budget because of these things. So yeah, tailoring is often like greatly appreciated by funders. I
that
find.
Makes great sense, and you're right. The budget one has been be tricky, but that is, and actually we could use the sort of things like the NAM, this dashboard in InHive helped us create of sort of how strong we are, and now we need to move it along in all these directions and how long that will take. I think that's a really good piece of advice. Can I ask a question? Is that allowed now?
Can I ask to hold that off? We'll come back to kind of reflecting and question, but this would be still more the opportunity if the funders would like to ask any clarifications that if you were to be considering giving Katie money, what other questions you would be asking her in the pitch. Marlee, go ahead.
Yes, I can ask one other follow-up. It sounds like you have a really good sense of what your network members need at this stage, right? And kind of as they get further along in their teaching careers. I'm curious what communication and feedback mechanisms you have in place on an ongoing basis to really listen to the needs of the network members.
Great question. So we have a pretty good sort of survey series of, you know, that we ask all now teachers on a reasonably regular basis. And one of the things we've been doing within InHive is making that tie in so that evaluating what we're doing with the network is part of the whole impact measurement of the whole of Now Teach. So these aren't discrete, if you like. We are then, we'll in due course we'll come back and we'll use probably InHive again to say, well, look, we were here in 2021. This is as a network, you know, we think from a network health point of view, almost this is where we think we are in, say, 2023 or whenever feels appropriate. We are learning, though we are not yet doing, some more sophisticated ways of looking at kind of network health, because of course the challenging thing about networking is so much of it will not happen directly through us. So we've built an online platform, we've just launched that, that's great, and you could be able to count up, oh look, there are this many interactions. But a lot of this will happen if we're successful in, you know, getting people excited about together in a room together. They will go off and do a thing and they don't have any particular need to report back to us. So it's trying to figure out the ways in which we can be asking the right questions to know that they are nonetheless talking to one another or doing something. And then we've practical. I think if I was to do a proper pitch, that makes me think I need a sort of proper piece on that. Yeah, I'm gonna have a chat with you.
There's definitely something there around like being able to, have some kind of monitoring framework, for want of a less jargony word. But I think you can also kind of overcome that in the initial stages by, not like tricking, but also kind of saying our data here is around, this is how many participants we want to have, this is how many events we want to have. So it kind of shows that you're thinking through these touch points and you're thinking through data gathering, but also acknowledging that actually a lot of this will be organic. But I think that kind of gives a little bit of confidence in the review of the application, that it's like it's not totally open-ended. You've got, for example, like we will have 500 more members by the end of year 3, and we would have run 3 conferences that year or something like that. And the rest can kind of
X% or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is kind of always strengthens a proposal to show you've kind of thought through the structure in that way, and a little bit, I guess, around like, what activities are planned even loosely that kind of holds it all together. Because I think that was, in your slides, when you speak around kind of a communication platform, those kind of really tangible things that bring it to life can be helpful.
And I would also add just the storytelling piece of it as well. So numbers are great, but also I think what moves people is the stories that they hear. So even if you do have some success stories that you would like to highlight, I think that's always a great catch for anyone, really.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great way to show versus tell I don't want to say infrastructure, but kind of that mechanism that you've built for listening to network members and adapting how you're engaging with them over time.
That's a good
through that story.
Mm-hmm. That's a really smart point. Yeah.
And one other piece that I guess it's not any more questions, Jan. So I'm feeling bad here because now it feels like feedback rather than questions. But
I mean, there are rules to be broken, so I guess I'll, and Brendan is not in the room. When he watches the recording, he'll come back to me. But I think absolutely, if you do not have any other, questions that you would like to seek as a clarification from Katie, then let's move then to the feedback portion. So we have now time for you to kind of, continue giving the feedback to Katie of how to improve the messaging or any other things that you would like to give. So go ahead, Katja.
Thank you. I was just making sure that the structure is okay for us to move on. But because one thing that Chrissy said that I want to bring back as well, for funders, I think it's always interesting to see also the sustainability of the project, right? Is there a chance in that Now Teach can actually become a self-sustained network maybe, and or a very small, like a very organic network in the sense that not a lot of infrastructure is needed maybe, and therefore what does that look like, or just the next steps on that growth path, no?
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Marlee or Chrissy, you would want to share with Katie in terms of the pitching? Marlee, go ahead.
Sure. Yes, my piece of feedback is really just along the lines of sharing what we're thinking a lot about right now in terms of networks, is around the design and how the design choices can enable a network to achieve its purpose. And so to give a really specific example from the proposal and kind of my reaction to it, I saw a bullet point about the need to continue developing resources, events, and materials to support the network. And I think that this gets to Chrissy's point that I'm curious to learn a little bit more about your thinking and kind of the hypothesis behind that. So is there a specific type of resource that you anticipate will effectively advance the network's purpose? Are there learnings from past events that are informing the choice to develop new ones? Maybe there's materials that your network members are asking for. And, we're not looking for 100% certainty, because especially in this space, we know that's not possible. But if you have a hypothesis and then that clear feedback loop to test and learn and iterate over time, that's something that we, look for and then would look to work with an organization that we're funding on how can you kind of continue to set that hypothesis, put something out in the world, and then collect the feedback and evolve, whether it's the event model, whether it's the resource, and kind of that plan for continual learning.
That's really good advice. All of this. Yeah, am I meant to respond in kind with any thoughts there, or mostly this is just really useful? But
I think this is for you to take in, and then maybe when we come back together with the other group as well, we can then share collectively also kind of the bigger things that you're taking away. But thanks, Marlee. And is there anything else, Chrissy, that you think, or Katja, that you think, for example, was either missing in the pitch and that was important, or something that you think would be prioritized, or better said differently?
I've realised I was merging my questions and feedback right from the beginning, so sorry about that. I think I think we've covered off a lot of the points that I had, to be honest. I think it's kind of in there, but there could be more on like impact to date. There was a lot on kind of like activities to date, but there could, you know, in the way of storytelling or in providing like data, but I think there could be more on kind of yeah, impact to date. But it's not always possible, and also I think, you know, you've only been around for a small amount of time and this is quite new, but I think going forward to set that kind of scene and tell that story, I think it's useful to kind of, yeah, be able to talk about like what's been achieved so far and how will this build on that, and why is now the right time to be doing it, and in this way and in this partnership.
Yeah. Just on, no, but on it, because you're so right. I want to be able to talk about impact, and I have stories, but I don't really have proper, because it's really only going to start happening now because they've only been qualified a couple of years. Is it more, would you think on impact, therefore, it's better to have some of those stories nicely articulated or simply articulated, or would it be, or additionally, would it be appropriate to use, you know, almost, I want to do something equivalent to, you know, look at what Teach First did, say, when they, you know, to sort of draw, to give faith that, okay, we haven't yet done it, but there is a possible type of impact, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, like prove the concept being proven, I suppose, is useful, but I'd also be, you know, everything's always got a but I'd also be cautious to kind of compare yourself to something that already exists, because I think this is novel and it is different, and its USP is, you know, I think it's really an attractive USP. So you don't want to kind of undersell yourself by being like, oh, we're just kind of going to do what,
a bit like that, yeah.
Yeah, but obviously there are loads of examples where these sort of networks have been hugely successful. But I guess it's kind of being like, it's a bit like that, but it's better, or but it has this, you know,
different
additional thing. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Chrissy. Katja, anything else that came to your mind, or any other feedback?
No, I think most of it was said. One thing that I'm just reflecting right now is, because you mentioned, Katie, that your expectations, let's say, is for the impact to be bigger somehow, no, or not to just be. And I'm wondering also how much of that as networks are, and this is actually to Marlee as well, right? For me, it's as networks ourselves, like, do we let things happen as they emerge and as they grow? No, and if the need is more to have that local community rather than the data scientist community impacting some curriculum, is that something that you would also sway a little bit, let's say, no, or let that become part of the entrance of this community rather than just with one focal point? Just trying to, I guess the more question or the feedback, I guess, would be, if you're taking that emergent strategy per se somehow from the community, no, and how to move that. Yeah.
So it almost seems to me that ties in with the other point you made, Chris. In fact, everyone's made around something to do with timescale, but also almost philosophy. This kind of concept of it being a self-sustaining thing that within X amount of years ought to be able to run itself, and articulating that philosophy, which is to say that if for a while the data scientists are doing interesting stuff, great, we'll support them But if after a while they've not nothing in particular to do, that's absolutely fine too. We're not going to like perpetuate data scientists in education if actually they have nothing, no desire to be held on to. So it's somehow articulating that is absolutely the vision, that we want to support those groups, observe what is happening, and do what we can to facilitate it.
So yeah, adding the word emergence always helps now, I would say. In the pitch.
That's the top tip of the session.
Exactly.
Thanks, Katja. Thanks, Chrissy, as well, and Marlee. We have about 2 minutes left in this group before we go into the joined group, and so this is also the opportunity for the audience members. If there's anything you would like to share from your experiences, either giving pitches and receiving feedback from funders, or if you're a funder yourself, if there's anything else you would highlight as something that you think worked particularly well, maybe that Katie did that you thought was effective strategy, or that you would think that could be an addition to her pitch. So please feel free to add that into the chat as well.
I just want to share feedback. My name is Andrea Collins. First of all, I love the idea. And the reason why, and I can say personally, I've worked in wealth management for almost 20 years now. And I literally was just dropping my children off at school last week and said, when I retire, I would love to be a teacher. And my daughter is like, really? And I'm like, I like a specific subject, not necessarily elementary school, but I could see myself doing that like in the second part of my life, And me saying that and then hearing your pitch, I know I'm not the only one that has that deep down desire to be able to share, our experiences, our perspective from different sectors, and be able to bring that back into different communities. And I just think that your program or organization is so valuable because, maybe coming from the perspective of sharing other testimonials or whys, or why these participants have gone into the educational sector, and what has drawn them into wanting to bring back their experiences or their perspectives into the educational system. I think it's so valuable to sort of push against groupthink, which happens in every organization, every sector, every industry. And this will allow, the experiences to be broadened, our like broader idea sharing coming from the marketplace back into the educational system, I think is just very transformative. And so, maybe adding that component into your pitch would be helpful.
Thanks, Andrea. And I think then, Katie, you were looking for funders, and you got somebody who's almost like a new participant for your program. So you recruited somebody, but it does reflect the power of the idea that you very convincingly communicated to the funders and to the audience. So thank you so much, Katie, and thank you so much, Marlee, Chrissy, and Katja as well. And we'll see everyone in the main room. Really appreciate it, and your questions in the chat as well. So thank you so much, and we'll continue the debate.